They're on every street. Painted porches, mailboxes full of bills, kids' toys half buried in unmown lawns. The American home, our sanctuary, our sacred illusion. But in the shadow of this idyllic facade lie homes built on blood, covered in silence, and kept alive through compliance. These aren't stories about serial killers or haunted houses. These are families, the pillars of society, that secretly practiced rituals of horror so extreme they make the worst fiction look tame. The monsters weren't hiding under the bed. They tucked their kids in. They paid their taxes. They served in churches, schools, military bases. This is the hidden history of generational evil in America. The Carroways were only the beginning. Some families passed down recipes, others passed down trauma, wrapped in birthday paper and called tradition. But a rare few, those quietly perched in rural towns, affluent suburbs, and remote compounds, passed down something darker. Systemic cruelty dressed in normalcy, an unspoken oath to keep the pain in the bloodline. These families understand something most people refuse to confront. Evil, when disguised well enough, becomes indistinguishable from love. These households perfect abuse not out of impulse, but out of ritual. They know what most people don't. Institutions won't stop them, because they are the institutions. They start young, not with violence, but with conditioning. A silent look from the mother, a subtle act from the father. Children in these families aren't protected from monsters, they're taught how to become them. Their earliest memories are filled with half-told stories, locked rooms, and accidents that never get spoken of again. By the time they hit puberty, they know what can be said, and what never must. The family legacy becomes an invisible tattoo burned into the soul, loyalty to secrecy over justice, to tradition over truth. This is how horror survives. Through the hands of the innocent, repurposed by design. We love the tidy ending. The bad guy dies, the girl escapes, fade to black. But real horror doesn't end. It reproduces. The families behind America's most disturbing, forgotten cases weren't eradicated. They were excused, overlooked, protected. Their crimes fade from the news, buried in bureaucracy, sealed in psychological reports marked inconclusive. And the neighbors? They knew, they always know. But they stay quiet because they sense the same truth. The monster is never just one man. It's a system, it's a lineage, it's a tradition no one wants to dig up. Because what they'd find would implicate all of us. Behind every broken child is an unrepentant elder. The grandparents in these families are never just sweet and senile. They are engineers, constructors of control, masters of psychological manipulation cloaked in piety, duty, and nostalgia. These are the matriarchs and patriarchs who built the house not just with wood and nails, but with rules, secrets, and cycles of fear. And when outsiders get too close, the elder steps in with a charming smile, a Bible verse, or a veiled threat. They don't just oversee horror. They orchestrate it, and they do so with the confidence of someone who knows the world will never question them. These families don't survive in isolation. They require an ecosystem, small towns where pastors look the other way, teachers miss the signs, and sheriffs share last names with suspects. These aren't random coincidences. They're carefully cultivated alliances. In some places, speaking out against that family is social suicide. Even when evidence surfaces, it's diluted through whispers, moved between departments, lost in jurisdictional limbo. This silence isn't ignorance, it's complicity. These towns know exactly what they're protecting, and more terrifyingly, why. Education is supposed to break cycles, but in these families, it becomes another tool for containment. Homeschooling isn't about academics, it's about isolation. If public schools are used, the child is taught early to lie, to present well, to fake normalcy. Teachers who sense something wrong often dismiss it because the child is polite, well-dressed, articulate. But behind that performance is a child trained in survival, conditioned to protect their abusers at all costs. The most dangerous part: many of them grow up believing they are the lucky ones, because they've been convinced the outside world is even worse. Some families have unspoken rules. Others have explicit ones, rules carved into flesh, etched in diaries, whispered under blankets after the bruises. These oaths aren't metaphorical. They're rituals, pledges made to protect the family's honor at any cost. If someone breaks the silence, they're punished, not just by their abusers, but by the entire family. Loyalty is everything. Truth is betrayal. Some children try to speak once, but the response, cold, calculated, and absolute, teaches them the family is God. To defy it is death, even if only a spiritual one. The pulpit is supposed to be sacred, but in the stories of these families, it often serves as a shield. Churches in small towns have long functioned as gatekeepers, not just to heaven, but to secrecy. Pastors are told partial truths, confessions are coded, and in return for loyalty, the family donates, attends, leads Bible study. The church becomes another institution that looks away, or worse, blesses them, because if the family sins are ever truly exposed, it won't just indict the home, it will stain the altar, and they won't allow that. You'd think structure and discipline would root out generational evil, but for certain families, the military offers the perfect mask. It reinforces hierarchy. It rewards silence. It normalizes suffering. Abusers in these lineages wear uniforms and medals, but behind closed doors, they reproduce the same control they learned from their own parents. And when accusations arise, they're buried under conduct reviews, reassignments, or honorable discharges. The family name remains untarnished while the cycle continues, trained, funded, and saluted. Healing isn't always the goal, especially not when the therapist is chosen by the family. These professionals, often well-meaning, become unwitting pawns. They're fed curated versions of reality, and when a child finally speaks the unspeakable, the therapist is taught to reinterpret, reframe, and rationalize. Are you sure that happened? Maybe that was just a bad dream. Sometimes, the family pays extra for therapists who know exactly how to redirect. In these cases, therapy becomes not a lifeline, but a muzzle. You think escape means salvation. Think again. The foster care system was supposed to protect kids from abuse, but it often delivers them into homes just as cruel, if not worse. And for some of these generationally abusive families, becoming foster parents is part of the design. They expand their reach under the guise of charity. With government checks and court-approved custody, they grow their lineage of horror legally, and no one questions it, because the paperwork is clean, and the children are too afraid to speak. What if I told you the most horrifying families don't look like monsters? They look like your neighbors, your church elders, your local school board. That's the genius of it. These families master respectability. They wield politeness like a weapon. They smile, they serve, they host holiday parties. And behind closed doors, they torture, they gaslight, they groom. Because evil doesn't survive by being obvious. It survives by being admired. We focus on the father, the disciplinarian, the abuser. But in many of these families, it's the mother who maintains the system. She soothes, excuses, distracts. She's the good cop to his evil. But don't mistake softness for innocence. These women enforce silence. They teach the daughters to endure, the sons to obey. And if one child escapes, she's the first to call them ungrateful, broken, damned. Because to admit the truth would mean facing her own complicity, and she would rather bury the truth than confront it. In some cases, the horror wasn't metaphorical, it was physical. Bones beneath the shed, burn marks in the crawl space, a diary hidden in a vent. These families kept their trophies close, because part of the power was knowing they'd never be found. But sometimes they were. by dogs, by construction workers, by children who didn't know better. And when it happened, the town covered it up. The police looked the other way, because exposure doesn't just ruin the family, it threatens to reveal just how many people were in on it. There's always one, the black sheep, the whistleblower, the child who escaped and spoke. Sometimes it's a daughter who ran at 16, a son who joined a cult just to feel safe. They tell their story, but no one listens. Or worse, everyone listens, and still nothing changes. The family disowns them, the community shuns them, therapists call them unstable, and in some cases, they disappear. Not because they were lying, but because they finally told the truth. These families don't just survive, they influence. They move into politics, clergy, law enforcement. They rise through the ranks not despite their cruelty, but because of it. These systems reward control, discipline, loyalty. And who better to exemplify that than someone forged in a house of unrelenting authority? Every badge, every robe, every office title becomes another layer of protection. Another reason no one will ever believe what happened behind those closed doors. Some don't escape, some adapt. They grow up learning that pain is power, that secrets are currency, that dominance equals safety. And when the abuser dies, they step into his shoes, not out of desire, but out of programming. They become the next generation's horror. And when their children cry at night, they hear themselves in those screams, and still do nothing, because to stop would mean admitting that the monster didn't die. It lives inside them now. To the outside world, it's a barbecue, laughter, photos, prayers before the meal. But in these families, reunions are rituals. Codes are reaffirmed. Eyes are watched. Stories are sanitized. The children are groomed to stay quiet in front of the cousins. Elders whisper in kitchens. Survivors who try to stay away get lured back with guilt. Come see your grandmother before she dies. But beneath the potato salad and family hymns, the original architecture still stands, unbroken, unrepentant. Abuse in these families doesn't always scream. It whispers. It uses phrases like, "Don't air our dirty laundry." "You're too sensitive." "He was just stressed." Language becomes the first prison. It redefines reality, turns violations into misunderstandings, crimes into mistakes, love into pain. And once you accept their words, you start doubting your own. The final goal isn't just control of your body, it's colonization of your mind. Every once in a while, someone writes it down, not for the police, not for justice, but for themselves. A daughter who records everything in code, a boy who draws what he can't say, a journal hidden in a floorboard. And when it's found, sometimes by accident, it becomes the proof no one wanted, a map of horror too detailed to ignore. But even then, justice isn't guaranteed, because documentation without action is just another tragedy buried in evidence lockers. You think the wealthy are immune to this? They are the worst offenders. Private schools, gated estates, diplomatic immunity. The wealthier the family, the more protected the horror. These aren't redneck backwoods cases. These are senators, CEOs, professors, and when their children cry out for help, their cries echo into a world that's been paid to stay deaf. Because when the monster wears a tailored suit, no one asks what's buried in the guest house. They called it satanic panic. They mocked the id of ritual abuse as fantasy. But here's the truth. The most extreme cases, those involving symbols, altars, ceremonial violence, weren't delusions. They were discreditable, too terrifying to be believed, easier to ridicule than investigate. But the survivors, they told the same stories across states, across years, and they didn't want fame. They wanted someone to believe them. We didn't. And the rituals continued. It doesn't happen often, but sometimes someone severs the line. They cut contact, they burn photos, they change their name, and they spend the rest of their life unraveling the rope tied around their psyche. These people become therapists, advocates, writers, monks. Some vanish into the woods, some come back as warriors, but all of them carry scars, and not all of them make it, because escaping the family doesn't mean the family escapes you. We say we care about children, but we ignore the systems that protect monsters. We criminalize survivors. We fund institutions that re-traumatize. We shrug when someone says, they come from a good family. This is the greatest trick these families ever pulled, convincing America that horror is rare. It isn't. It's ritualized, hidden, documented in silence. You just have to look closer, but most people won't, because if they did, they'd have to ask a dangerous question. How close am I to the damned? They're still here, in PTA meetings, behind pulpits, at the DMV. They vote. They run businesses. Their kids go to school with yours. The horror didn't end. It matured, learned how to hide better, speak cleaner, smile brighter. You don't need to believe in demons. You just need to believe that evil learns. And these families, they're on their third, fourth, fifth generation of horror, and they're still winning. This isn't about a few bad families. This is about culture. We worship control. We honor obedience. We elevate legacy. And in doing so, we've built a society that breeds generational abuse and calls it tradition. The American family, as sold to us, is a holy image. But sometimes, holiness hides horror. And if we keep pretending otherwise, we're not just enabling evil, we're becoming its missionaries. There's only one way out. The family tree must be set on fire, not just by those who lived through it, but by those willing to listen, to believe, to disrupt. If you recognize these patterns, speak. If you've lived them, write. And if you haven't, don't look away. The houses may be quiet now, the fences neat, but inside, the rituals persist. You can't save every child, but you can dam the silence. And maybe, just maybe, that's enough to crack the foundation.